Well, hey there, idiots. Welcome back to Observe. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the case surrounding Amanda Knox. Let's go ahead and start. Now, as with all true crime content here on the channel, I am hoping to be able to maintain monetization, but it's difficult. So if you would like to be able to ensure that I can continue making true crime content for you, please consider following some of the links in the description below, be it Patreon, merch, Audible, etc. All of those are very helpful to me, and they help make content like this that might get demonetized possible for you. I'm going to do my best to maintain as ad-friendly of content as I possibly can, so some of the details and backstories, so on and so forth, that would be considered inappropriate for ads will be left out, and you will have to go and do your own research for that. That being said, I am going to give it my best shot to be able to give you a brief backstory so that you can be caught up, kind of, before I start into this read. So the 20-year-old Amanda Knox decided that she was going to study abroad in Italy. She was your average, everyday American girl who considered herself to be quirky, unique, and cute. When she went to Italy, she found that the scholarly program that she anticipated she was going to be participating in was quite laid back, so instead she approached life there as a chance to be able to live a little and have some experiences along the way. While she was there, she had a few roommates in the upper floor of a small cottage. All the roommates got along quite well, although some of them had differing views on the world themselves. Along with that, she had a boyfriend who she had for 7 days before, quite literally, all hell broke loose. Now, it's at this point that I'm going to, 1, abbreviate everything, and then 2, skirt around some of the more gory details of the crime that happened. Long story short, Amanda, who was at her boyfriend's house, according to her, went home to discover that the door to the apartment complex, the upper floor, was ajar, and that there were some odd details. There were some feces in a toilet, there were blood on the floor of a bathroom and around the sink area, but not very much. And last but not least, her roommate's door was locked, which according to her was not very uncommon. She went back to her boyfriend's house, told him about it. He thought it was very suspicious, and they called the police, tried to get into the door. They couldn't get the door in. The police came, kicked the door in, discovered the crime scene. The crime scene was very brutal, so I will not talk about it here. If you would like to know more details about what was in the crime scene, I heavily suggest you check out the documentary on Netflix. That being said, after I watched hours and hours of footage and combed through the actual footage that was left from the crime scene, the actual evidence files, including court documents, I came to the point that I realized that the evidence was so contradictory and confusing that it was almost impossible to establish a good direction from the evidence alone. If you'd like to be able to hear a little bit more of a summary as to that side of things, I suggest you go and check out Dr. Grande's video. He does an excellent and very brief job at summarizing the entire proceedings. What I am going to focus on here, quite literally out of necessity, is just Amanda's nonverbal communication in the earliest interview that I could track down, done with Diane Sawyer, and I had to do some things with the footage to hopefully avoid copyright. Now, there's the high chance that the studio that Diane works for is still going to copyright this video, so please, again, consider the links below. I really do appreciate it. Now, even though this is the earliest footage that I was able to track down of Amanda, it is still 4 years after the incident itself, which means that this nonverbal read is going to be 4 years separated from the actual trauma of the event, which means that it's not going to be as accurate. Amanda has had time at this point to be able to rehearse if she needs to. She has had time to psychologically recover if she needs to. And all of this just makes it difficult to be able to establish a solid and accurate nonverbal read. I'm going to do the best that I can here and let you know what I see as I see it, and then at the very end, we'll talk about it and I'll give you my educated opinion. Without further ado, let's go ahead and watch this footage.
Concertante of sex. Sphinx of Perugia.
I haven't heard those. I mean, I've heard the gist of them. And they're wrong.
I'm going to let you know that in this interview, much of it is just discussing things that aren't exactly relevant to what I would like to see in question form. It's not just asking, did you kill them? Or did you have anything to do with this? Did you do anything about the crime? It's all centered around the situation around it. Now, this serves a purpose still non-verbally because it allows for me to be able to really establish how Amanda interacts with people while she's being interviewed and helps me understand what her baseline is, although be it flawed because of the separation between the incident and this interview. So I have spent over 24 hours just trying to find the footage and establish a baseline, and that leads us to today's read. So as you can see, she's emoting as you would expect somebody who had been called said things to emote. Being called these sorts of names is never comfortable, especially for somebody who is young and still trying to establish who they are in the world. So when we see that reflect on her face through the tenseness in her eyebrows and the corners of her mouth displaying these solemn feelings that she's having in regards to this, this is exactly like we would hope to see in a person who emotes well with situations. That leads me to believe that as I continue forward, either one, she's an excellent actor, or two, she genuinely does emote with the feelings that she's having. And that's good news for a body language analyst. If they're genuinely emoting with the feelings they're having, that means that it's going to make for a more accurate read. So hopefully we'll be able to get some good answers from this.
It's one thing to be called certain things in the media, and then it's another thing to be sitting in a courtroom fighting for your life while people are calling you a devil.
So if you're looking at her face, one of the big tells for her is the movement of her mouth. She's very expressive with her mouth and sometimes her eyes and eyebrows. However, you can see the sadness and pain in the tenseness around the corners, bottom lip and upper lip of her face. This is common in people that are genuinely feeling negative emotions centered around a certain thing. If you took a screenshot of just her eyes, you can tell that she's at very least frustrated, but her mouth is really the deciding factor here, revealing her true emotions. So when she's referring to this, she genuinely is upset about it. She has feelings about being called these things.
It's not true. For all intents and purposes, I was a murderer, whether I was or not. And I had to live with the idea that that would be my life. It was incredibly painful.
As you can see there, all of her head movements and facial expressions are synchronized. As she's saying certain negative things, she shakes her head no. As she's saying positive things, she shakes her head yes. This is just showing synchronicity between her words and her bodily movements, her nonverbal communication. This is still a good sign. Could she be acting well? Quite possibly. Is that possible to determine right now? Not at all. Also, if you're curious, this footage is all broken up, one, to hopefully maintain the ability to not be copyrighted, but then also I wanted to only capture the footage of her talking and her face because that's all that I want to notice during this time. I've looked through the evidence. That did not help. I'm looking at her body language here, and that's kind of why you're here as well.
I felt like after crawling through a field of barbed wire and finally reaching what I thought was the end, it just turned out that it was the horizon, and I had another field of barbed wire that I had ahead of me to crawl through.
What's the first thing you want people to know about you?
I want the truth to come out. I'd like to be reconsidered as a person.
Okay, that line is important and part of the psychology behind Amanda that I think has weight in the case that not many people have talked about. So a little backstory on her. She is from a family that the parents divorced and step-parents come in, and this makes it very important for the child to maintain this sense of self-sufficiency. And I think that that helps lend towards some of Amanda's odd behavior later on, which we'll talk about. But it's this sense of self-sufficiency, and then also Amanda's pretty high opinion of herself that lends to some of the detachment that we're going to see from her. And in her stating that she would like to be able to be reconsidered as a person is revealing as well, because it's very important to her what other people think about her. She has a high self-image, and she wants everybody else to be able to maintain that self-image as well. This has some effect and some play in some of the relationships and reactions later on here, which we'll just about get to. Non-verbally speaking, however, as you can see, she is still emoting and displaying nonverbal communication that aligns with the words that she's saying. As far as I can tell, she's telling the truth in this point. Also, she has no reason to lie here, so it likely is true in and of itself.
The wonderful thing about my family is that we need each other, always, all of us. And whatever happens to one of us happens to us all.
Fill in the blank.
Not totally certain about that. That is mostly true. However, considering that it is a blended home that she came from, that kinda can lead towards a lot of people clumped together in those homes. There's sometimes favorites and preferences that happen in those situations. Also, she does a lot more pausing in here. This could be due to the emotion, or it could be due to the fact that she doesn't fully believe what she's saying in that sort of situation. But she has no reason to really throw her family under the bus in this sort of situation, so she's trying to dress up that relationship pretty well. That being said, this doesn't really have anything to do with the case at hand, so we're not going to focus on it too much.
An adventure of selfhood, I'd say. I mean, I was at an age where you know you're both insecure but you're confident at the same time.
You wrote a sentence in the book that surprised me.
So this is just in regards to what she would term the trip as. This response is after a long period of time has already gone past with this crime, and Amanda changed over this crime. Her entire personality, her demeanor, her outlook on life has definitely been altered by how everything was handled. So what her words are here may not be necessarily as true as what she intended on it being then, but hindsight is always 20/20 as well.
You said, what if I had not gone on a campaign for casual sex?
It was irresponsible. A child's going about a very adult thing.
You thought that's what the liberated,
Yes,
free-spirited girls did?
I thought that's what all self-confident, free-spirited women did.
Interesting thing here non-verbally, and once again, this is just showing the connectivity between her nonverbal displays and her emotional state. So you can see Sawyer does this like, is this what you feel kind of thing, and raises her chin. And then in response to this, not only mirroring this, but also in relation to the emotion and the motive behind the words, Amanda starts talking about what an empowered person would do. And as many people start talking about empowerment, they do this elevation tell. It's a gravity-defying tell that's common in empowerment or pride or any of these similar feelings. They raise their chin, and this is a defiance gesture. And this is just showing that that is indeed the gesture that most people would use in that time. So her nonverbal communication that is displayed is very synchronized right now. That's important to be able to understand in a nonverbal read, is how they display on certain things that you would expect to see. So in this situation where she's talking about things about empowerment, it's a defiant gesture as you display that you're more confident, so on and so forth. Synchronicity between the nonverbal and the verbal is important to note, and it's been noted here. So that means that later on down the line, as we see things that are nonverbally represented, that means that there's a high chance that it is in fact clearly representing what the emotions are, regardless of the words. Let's keep watching.
And at that point, I still felt like a clueless girl. I was naive enough that I didn't understand the way bad things can happen to regular people for no reason.
Okay, so she says the way that bad things can happen to, and she does this hold, she stops, she processes something. She's been talking smoothly throughout most of this, and then it gets to this point where she stops. She is obviously doing some sort of psychological processing. That's just from the verbal cadence there's processing that's happening. She also looks down and her face blanks as she tries to think of something new. Now, the phrase is that bad things happen to good people. That's what she was intending on saying. However, instead she says bad things happen to regular people after thinking about it for a second. Now, the only reason that this is important in a nonverbal read is because now we know that if she's trying to think of something different to say, she's going to display something similar to this cluster of tells, the looking down and the blinking of the face. So if we see that in an area where it should just be a clean answer, like say, did you do the crime itself? Instead of just responding a no, if she looks down and blinks, we know she's processing. She's trying to think of a different answer than what should be said. This is an important tell to be able to take note of, and I've absolutely taken note of it here.
You were going to say good people.
Well, all people are good, but I mean, we also are all regular.
Okay, so something to note about her smile. She has commonly, in all of the footage that I've watched, displayed this contempt smile. And the reason that I say contempt is because it's common in times of contempt. It's a lopsided, one-sided smile. Half of the face, half of the mouth especially, is displaying more of a neutral expression, while the other half is smiling. Now, this is common in both genetic factors, so say some people just have a lopsided smile, that's totally possible. But if it's an actual emotive smile, and they can normally smile very balanced and even, as we can see that she can here, there's a psychological reasoning behind that. And contempt is common in people who feel that they may or may not be a little bit elevated above other people, be that psychologically, physically, mentally, so on and so forth. To see that smile displayed here, that is another indicator towards Amanda having this self-sustained, self-sufficient, high opinion of herself beyond the normal, it's good to have good self-esteem. She might think a little too highly of herself, and that could bleed over into her relationships. We're getting really close to that point, and I'm going to talk about why that's important in just a second.
You look at the picture of the girl who arrived there. What would you want to say?
I want to tell her not to be afraid of what's going to happen, because what happened to me hit me like a train.
Okay, during this time, we're seeing the same wrestle with pain and anguish on Amanda's face that we saw earlier when referring to some of the names that she was being called. And it's again heavily reliant on the action in her mouth. First, we see a lip compression that is a common tell of biting back an emotion, regularly a negative emotion. Along with that, right afterwards, she starts trying to smile and act like it's more lighthearted, but you could see the tenseness in her bottom lip and the corners as she's wrestling back actual pain in relation to the topic at hand. This is still another point that's pointing me towards the direction of her relating her emotions to her nonverbal. Either this is conscious or subconscious or a mixture of both, and I believe it's a mixture of both. I think that she's not only charismatic, so she is in control of her displays of emotion to an extent, but also she does seem to be an emotive person and display it physically. That's good news for an analyst. It makes it harder to lie when you're already a very emotive person.
And there was nothing I could do to stop it. I was really afraid.
Okay, once again, she's saying negative things. Her head is following that. So far, she has been very synchronized. And that's good news, because that means that when it comes down to the point of a lie, she's more likely to show that lie more clearly to somebody who knows what they're looking for. But I do want to be very clear with this also. There is the complete possibility that she's just a good liar and she's been lying this entire time. I don't believe that's the case here. I don't have any evidence for that yet. I would rather believe that she's being genuine than not. I have to keep my mind level, though, and maintain an unbiased approach to Amanda herself. I cannot let my own personal opinions fall in the way of evidence. Let's keep watching and gather that evidence.
I was putting away my things in the room when she came to my door and introduced herself and was immediately very nice. Just this immediate exchange of, wow, this is someone who I can get along with.
She's talking about meeting the roommate Meredith, the one who is the victim of the crime. And you'll notice once again that this smile of contempt slips in, this lopsided smile, this very telling smile, slips in when she starts recounting her first interactions with Meredith. And this smile, I feel, is telling towards the relationship they have. This smile, like the aw, it really is. It's like a aw kind of thing. It's a looking down upon another person smile. This can be a conscious thing that somebody does because they like the way it looks, but if it's not being consciously done, it means that they're looking down on that person. Now, she's about to say that they were good friends, and she probably felt that they were her interpretation of good friends. But she probably isn't used to having the kind of relationship that would be a proper good friend in this situation because of how self-sufficient she has to have been from her childhood. So while they are good friends in her eyes, and they likely were, they probably got along quite well, we also know from the other roommates that Meredith didn't quite approve of how Amanda handled her specifically romantic life. She thought she was a little bit looser than she should have been. That relationship dynamic is important to bring up because later on in the case, it comes out that Amanda was acting inappropriately, or what people thought was inappropriately, for somebody who had just lost an apparently good friend. Let's keep watching.
Were you ever jealous of her?
No.
Were you ever angry at her?
No.
When we take a camera break,
All right, were you ever jealous of her? No. Good. Synchronization. But once again, with a contempt smile, she wasn't jealous of her because she didn't need to be. She was already, in her own opinion, likely better than her. Why would you be jealous? And then the next question, it was once again all synchronized as well. She's telling the truth here. She wasn't jealous. She had no need to be.
she's looking down. I ask what she's thinking.
It bothers me when people suggest that she wasn't my friend. I was stunned by her death. She was my friend.
Okay, that's true. She was frustrated, and it shows. It shows in her face, her facial expression, the squinting of the eyes, the setting around her nose and her mouth. It all expresses subtle frustration. Squinting of the eyes is a very obvious one. The rest of it's a little bit more subtle. And also affirmative nods during that. I was frustrated. That's important. If it was I was frustrated, something else is going on there that we have to think more about. But if it's I was frustrated, that is nodding in affirmation of her own words. She thought they were friends. And they were, according to her opinion at least. But like I said, that does have some dynamic that needs to be unpacked a little further.
Colpe de fulmine?
Un colpo di fulmine. That's a lightning strike. Yeah.
This is now switching. Once again, I apologize for how weirdly this entire interview jumps around. I cut out all of the dialogue that Sawyer adds afterwards and in betweens and befores and all that. Because like I said, I just want to focus on Amanda here. So I apologize that this is suddenly like, oh, now we're hard crashing over into Amanda's boyfriend's writing down of her. But it's still important information to gather because it's nonverbal and it's helping us understand who Amanda is nonverbally, emotionally, and psychologically. And when this is brought up, she does this look down and bashfulness, which bashfulness is a lighthearted and not negative shame expression. When you're a little embarrassed, you look down, you look away, you can sometimes flush, you'll sometimes do a small smile, and she does all of these things in relation to this, and that's largely because most people are uncomfortable with talking about being heavily flattered. Now we know that Amanda probably has a pretty high opinion of herself, so it's not to an extreme, but everybody feels this way in this sort of situation.
He writes about how taken he was with me, and I really liked him as well.
Okay, so she does a weird little cluster of expressions here. She says that he writes that he was really smitten with me. She does a little balanced smile. It is symmetrical on both sides, and this is a good sign. This is a genuine emotion. There's no contempt or anything like that. And then she says, and I was really taken with him as well, and does her same little contempt smile, meaning that maybe there was a little bit more to that relationship than originally believed. And then we find out later on, which you won't find that out in this video, but if you go and do 24 hours of studying on this, you'll find it. Eventually she gets to the point where she's not interested in being with him, and that kind of reveals some of that dynamic after the fact. So chances are at this point she had already started, if she hasn't already broken up with him, I'm not sure at this point, she's already started to feel that worry or that feeling of being like, you know what, things aren't going to work out. This isn't for us side of things. Whereas he was more, things are going to work out. This is for us. Let's keep watching.
We smoked. We had sex. We were together. We just hung out together. We talked. He talked to me about his mom. We made faces at each other. We were being silly and together.
So this is talking just about their relationship, and it was largely also talking about that night, how that worked. During the more intimate times of that, she looks down. This is a sign of shame or embarrassment, and also licks her lips. This is a sign of a dry mouth or possible nerves, and this is all just to be expected. This is to be expected from a young person who is emoting as people in that culture would normally emote. And on the note of culture, I want to go ahead and point this out. There are universal expressions, and there are cultural expressions, and then there are learned expressions. And during this time, these are both universal, but largely cultural. So the yes shake and the no shake, that's a cultural thing. Many cultures have it lined up to where it's yes and no, but that's not every culture. That is absolutely not every culture. However, with hers, it is. So that's what I'm keeping in mind as I continue on through this read.
How high were you?
I had smoked a joint with Raphael, and what that did to my memories was it made them less concrete, but it didn't black them out and it didn't change them.
So we can see here again that she is psychologically processing. It's the same blank expression, the same looking down. She's coming up with her answer. And the reason for this, and I know that this is accurate because of the study that's been done on cannabis and marijuana, is the psycho effect of marijuana is a memory impairment drug. It makes it to where memories can seem like dreams or something similar if you've had a lot of it. So when she's saying that it didn't black her out, but it made it really darn hard to remember exact details, that's exactly in line with all of the research and study that has been done into marijuana and cannabis. That's truthful, but she was searching to try to find the way to present that well. This isn't a sign of deceit. This is a sign of formulating an answer. Let's keep watching.
You remember with clarity that you did not go out that night. You stayed in the whole night.
We stayed in the whole night.
So, no formulating of answers there. She kept her gaze up. She's nodding in affirmation. And that would be true with a person who has smoked marijuana. They will remember broad things. They will remember if they decided to up and head to the store as opposed to not. Whereas the exact details of the night will fade into this dreamy, wishy-washy style state. So when she's saying, yeah, I remember that I didn't leave, and she's showing the positive and affirmative nonverbal communication, so far from what I've seen and what I've been able to establish, she emotes very clearly, and her nonverbal communication is very synchronized with that. So when I see this sort of synchronicity between her words and her actions, the chances are that's telling the truth, just from what we've already observed. That's why everything that we've observed so far and gathered in is important to note. But this still isn't enough, and there's still some more footage left, so let's keep going.
Did you see the bath mat? Did you
Not
see the
yet.
footprint?
Not yet.
But you know, people look at this and they say, door open, blood in the bathroom. Those are red alarms.
Well, I had never before experienced anything in my life that was drastic.
Because people think you'd be automatically concerned.
Well, and indeed I was. That's why I called my mom.
So both from Sawyer and from Knox in this situation, both of their pitches raise, and that indicates just a heightened state of emotion on either side. Sawyer's asking a more intense probing question, and Amanda's matching that intensity in answering, and the pitch is one of the things that shows that best. Along with that, if you consider the situation that Amanda found herself in with 3 other roommates, and also she reported and others reported that the door was not a reliable door, so they assumed that maybe the door had been left open or blew open or something along those lines, it wouldn't be an immediate thing that you needed to call the police. Even the blood in the bathroom would be easily explainable by somebody accidentally getting hurt, so it's still not enough red flags to warrant calling the police in a foreign country that you're still not really a native to, no matter how long you've been there. So I can see and understand why an American girl would not call the police in this foreign country off of something as small as an open door and a little bit of blood on a faucet. Is it weird? Yeah, it's still weird, 100% weird, but people will try to explain away things as best they can if they're trying to avoid a situation. So that's something that I'm just keeping in mind. I have to try to keep in mind both sides of this coin to try to understand a better, unbiased picture of Amanda's actions.
I remember very distinctly telling her, because she was like, what do you mean a foot? A foot? What does that mean? Is there a what? And I said, I don't know. I don't understand.
So we're talking now about the police talking about the crime scene, and Amanda's understanding of Italian is pretty limited. She's not fluent by any means, so she's only catching a few words, and one of those words is a foot, so she was under the impression that perhaps there was a severed foot in the bedroom and that was the cause of things. She wasn't sure. And during this recollection that she's having, she's not showing any nonverbal misalignment. That would be a red flag for me. And thinking about it, third person view, trying to relate to her and put myself in her shoes, that still also makes sense as well. I'm trying to maintain as unbiased an opinion of this case as I possibly can, especially since I feel like a lot of bias seeped into the investigation. But not going to get into that in this video. Let's keep watching.
There was a body, and that there was an armoire, and there was blood, and there was a blanket. As far as cartwheels or splits, I never did a cartwheel. I did do the splits, and then later on she claimed that I was doing a whole number of gymnastics.
I'm going to start talking about some of the body language that she's displaying here and how it relates to the story and everything that's centered around this. This is that part that I was telling. And she starts acting quite strangely. To be very fair to everybody who is cynical of Amanda, this is strange. There's no actual proof. It's just a he said, she said sort of situation. It was actually just a lie. And I was really disgusted with how the media handled this on this situation. When she's asked if she was there that night, she does a very odd display of tell.